Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I have a very special episode to bring you. A special installment. I'm going to need to don the tiara for this one. Yes, folks, I'm here to talk about Wonder Woman 84. Just watched it yesterday, just came out yesterday. So my wife and I watched it. I have a lot of thoughts about this movie. I'm going to have a lot of spoilers that I need to get into because there's a lot to talk about with this one. But before I get into the spoilers, I'll just give you the quick top level for those of you who don't want to be spoiled. I'll just tell you my basic thoughts, and then we'll have a spoiler warning, and then we'll get into the spoilers. So my general sense of this movie is I enjoyed it. It was kind of a mess. I think it was much more ambitious than the first movie. In the first movie, which I liked but didn't love, they were really only trying to do one thing, and that was have a really good version of Wonder Woman. And I thought they succeeded brilliantly at that because I thought Gal Gadot was great. But the movie wasn't really even trying to say anything. It wasn't really trying to do anything. It was just like, the plot was literally, let's go from point A to point B and then punch a guy in the face. That's the whole movie. So it was very simple. They did it very well, but they weren't really trying to do anything that difficult. This movie, on the other hand, they're trying to do a bunch of things. Like, it's super ambitious. They have all these different characters, different plot lines, different thematic elements. This means, like, they have a specific point to this one. There's a lot of subtext. They're trying to do a lot of things. As a result, they fail at a whole bunch of things, but they also succeed at more things than the first one, simply because they're trying to do more things. So for me, it's a really mixed bag. I did like it. On the whole, I kind of think it was better than the first one because it was actually trying to do something. And the thing it was trying to do, I think it accomplished. But it's much messier than the first one. So I think a lot of people would probably like the first one better because it's just sort of an easier, more linear story that they're telling. It's tighter. This one, it just goes all over the place. So I give them props, though, for trying to do some really interesting things with the storyline. Overall, though, I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10, or I guess a B- if we're using that kind of scale. So those are my spoiler-free thoughts. Now, why don't you join me here on the other side? I'm going to spoiler warning. From the rest of this video, we're going to be talking pure spoilers. Okay, I'm assuming if you're still watching that you're ready to be spoiled. Here's the big thing for me, is that the fundamental issue with the movie is that it's not about Wonder Woman. It's not about Diana. She's not the main character, and basically she has almost no arc. The tiny arc that she has, which I'll get into in a minute, is tacked on and not earned. It's also not a Cheetah movie. This suffers from a classic comic book sequel problem that a lot of comic book movie sequels have, where they have multiple villains. And whenever you start bringing in multiple villains, you get multiple storylines and things get muddled, and it almost never works. And that's too bad here, because Kristen Wiig turns in a great performance as Cheetah. She's really interesting. The dynamics between her and Diana are really interesting. They get set up fairly early in the film, and you're looking forward to seeing how their relationship plays out. And then we don't really get it because the movie's not about her either. Fundamentally, the movie is about Maxwell Lord. Maxwell Lord's the main character. He's the character that has the arc. It's his journey that the movie follows. It's his decisions that drive the plot. And at the end, he's the character that has actually changed as a result of the film. And I get into more of this later. And on that level, the movie really succeeds very well, because I am absolutely convinced, as a writer, I have done a little bit of screenwriting as well professionally. I'm absolutely convinced that the Maxwell Lord story was the foundation piece for the entire film. It's the basic concept is Maxwell Lord's arc. Everything else, including Wonder Woman, was sort of grafted onto what they wanted to do with Maxwell Lord. And what they do with Maxwell Lord, I personally found really interesting, because the whole movie is an allegory about Donald Trump. So what happens in the movie, I'm assuming that either you don't care about being spoiled at this point or you've already seen it, so I won't go into too much, but we see in the movie that we have this guy, it's the mid-'80s, and there's this guy who's sort of a huckster. There's a pivotal scene where a guy calls him a con man, and he flips out because he's like, I'm not a con man. But actually, the fact that he is a con man is the whole point of the film, because what he gets this magic stone that was created by the Duke of Deception, classic Wonder Woman supervillain, one of her arch enemies, the Duke of Deception, has created the stone, and when you get it, you can make one wish on it, but then you lose something in return. And he wishes to become the stone itself, so that means he can grant wishes to people, but in return he can take anything from them that he wants as the payment, right? And so what happens is we have this guy who is promising all these things. He's promising people that they can get anything they want in life, but it's all a bunch of lies, because whenever someone does a wish, they lose something vitally important to them, and they're left worse off than before. So if you believe that Maxwell Lord, Donald Trump, can give you what you want just based on your belief in him, it will lead you to ruin. And so at the end of the film, he has this thing where it's being sent out to the world, and everybody is affected by it, and so he's getting wishes from billions of people around the world. And then Wonder Woman uses her lasso of truth, and so the lasso of truth beams the truth through this to everybody, and they all rescind their wishes. I've seen people talk about this as an absurd plot point, but it makes sense when you realize that everybody in the world is being affected by the lasso of truth, so they can see and experience the truth. They know fundamentally what the truth is, and at that point they all reject these fake wishes. It's made very clear through this allegory that he's supposed to be Donald Trump. It's not just that the basic film is about truth versus lies, fake news versus real news, con men who will say anything to gain power versus the real life. But they make it very clear visually. My wife mentioned a few times while we were watching it how she was having a hard time with Pedro Pascal, who plays Maxwell Lord, because he's got this really ridiculous looking blonde hairdo, and it's like this big perm, it's like this poofy, and it's like this unnatural blonde color. It's very much a Donald Trump orange hair situation. And then at the end of the film, he literally usurps power from the President of the United States. And he goes to this bunker, but it's designed to look like the White House press room. And when he's issuing his crazy speech to trick everybody in the world into giving up everything and destroying themselves, he's standing at the podium in the White House with the White House symbol behind him, and he's got his orange hair flowing, and he's ranting all these like 80s, greed is good catchphrases at people. And I thought it was very obvious that the whole film was about Donald Trump's rise to power and the danger of believing lies and how that can lead to destruction. And you have to embrace the truth, no matter how difficult it is for you personally, because that's the only way you can actually progress and move forward as a person and as a society. On that level, I thought the film worked really well. Like, I thought it was very interesting that they were doing that and having that message. Seems to have been a fairly subtle, which is boggling to me because I thought it was really obvious. But I haven't seen anybody else talk about it in reviews, and that's great, because for me, I think subtext always works better than text when you're trying to change people's minds or opinions or feelings. Telling them the message just doesn't work, but implying it allows them to feel it and work it through for themselves. So I thought that film was really successful on that level. The problem is that it makes Diana a secondary character in her own film, and the way that they used her did not work for me on a few levels. They bring back Steve Trevor, and I think Chris Pine is great. They have a great chemistry. They work really well on screen together. And his version of Steve Trevor is the best version of Steve Trevor ever. Better than the TV show, way better than any of the versions in the comics. I like the George Perez version of Steve Trevor, but Chris Pine is definitely the best version. But I don't think Wonder Woman needs him. I don't think the Wonder Woman movies need him. I don't think the character needs him around. And his role in this film suggested some really cool angles they could have taken, but that they didn't. And that's why I'm frustrated, because basically what happens is Wonder Woman gives up her powers and her identity for this guy that she loves. Because when she wishes to bring him back, she loses her powers. And I think this could have been really interesting, just sort of as a commentary on male-female relationships. And something that happens to a lot of people, not just women, is you get in a relationship, and you lose your personality in the relationship, conforming. And it could have been a really interesting to have Wonder Woman grapple with this, realizing that she's sort of given up who she is for this guy. Something that he makes clear he doesn't want her to do, because he's trying to convince her the whole time not to do it. So that is a really interesting thing that they ultimately didn't do anything with. The arc that she does have is really an arc for her as a character about the grieving process. At the beginning of the film, it's 55 years later since he's died, but she's still alone, and she's still sad and lonely, and she's sort of resigned herself to this life without love because she still has never gotten over his death. And then he comes back, and then he dies again because she has to renounce her wish in order to save the world and defeat Maxwell. So he disappears again. I've got a lot more to say about this. And so at the end of the film, there's this, like, 6 months later, this little thing at the end where we see that she's realized, she's sort of finally moved on. She's realized he's gone. She's dealt with the grief, and now she's ready to live again and be happy. Problem is, that's completely unearned, because we never see any of that. It's literally like she's mourning for this guy. He dies, and that same day is when she has the fight with Maxwell Lord. And then we cut to 6 months later, and now she feels better. So the actual growth, the development that gives her her character arc, we never see any of it. It's a completely unearned coda at the end that they had to do. Otherwise, Wonder Woman would have had no arc at all in the entire film. So I appreciate them realizing they needed to give her this arc, but it was totally unearned. It was a total cheat. If we had had a film that dealt with that, where it showed her going through the grieving process of losing him and then having to deal with it, and sort of, I mean, that could have been a really interesting thing that we haven't seen really much in comic book movies. We've seen it a little bit, actually, with Steve Rogers, Another Man Out of Time, and with his thing with Peggy Carter throughout his movies. So, but we've never really seen, like, a superhero movie talk about grief like that. I think it could have been really interesting, but again, we didn't see any of it. So I was really frustrated. Diana has no arc in the film, really. The things that they do set up with her never pay off. The other thing they did that they really set up with, and that I think could have been really interesting, if they didn't have any of the Maxwell Lord stuff, is that we've also got the Cheetah. Now, I haven't talked about Cheetah much. Kristen Wiig is great as the Cheetah, but we don't see nearly enough of her. We get quite a bit at the beginning where it's establishing her relationship with Diana, and it sets up what could have been a really fascinating and interesting parallel, because basically she wishes to become Diana because she is unpopular, she's mousy, everybody overlooks her, no one takes her seriously, and she's also physically weak. She gets attacked by this guy and Wonder Woman saves her. And so she's a person that has no power in her life at all. She is she's smart, but is sort of taken for granted and overlooked. She's attractive but doesn't realize it, and nobody else realizes it because she doesn't realize it. But she has no power. And so she wishes to become more like Diana because she recognizes that Diana has the self-possession that she doesn't have. She doesn't know yet that Wonder Woman has the superpowers, and she gets those accidentally through her wish. And what could have really been interesting is if we had seen the parallel between a powerless person, Dr. Minerva, a powerless woman specifically, suddenly gaining power and getting to a position of power where now she is self-possessed and she has self-confidence and she's smart and she's beautiful and she's super strong and she has all these superpowers. A person that's been a woman who has been downtrodden by society and completely powerless in society, suddenly gaining power. If that had been contrasted with Diana losing her powers, because Diana, over the course of the film, she starts to lose her powers and she gets weaker and weaker, could have been really interesting to see those parallels. When I was talking to my wife after the movie, I was like, they seem to be struggling to find something to do with Diana. There's no arc for her. And that's something that happens in the comics all the time, because she was designed as an icon and not as a person. Like, she was literally designed to be an icon. She doesn't really have any flaws. So my wife was like, well, what flaws does she have? And I really had to rack my brain to think of it. And I realized that in the first movie, they nailed what her flaw is, and that was the naivety. That was what the whole first movie was about. It was how naive she was. But we see in the second movie here that she's still naive in a specific way. Yes, she has now 60 years of dealing with the outside world, and she's much more comfortable talking with people, and she understands how the world works, sort of. But what she doesn't understand is that she comes from a position of privilege because she's literally a demigod. She has no idea what Minerva's experience as a regular, powerless woman in the world is. And we see that when they have the confrontation in the White House, where she tells Minerva that Minerva has to give up her wish to help save the world. They have to renounce the wish, or otherwise bad things will happen. She's like, you lost your humanity. You used to be friendly and nice, and now you don't care about people as much because that's what you lost. And my wife and I were both, and Cheetah, were all like, that's really easy for you to say. Like, you're asking her to give up you're asking her to give up her agency, right? And that's easy for someone that has privilege and agency to ask, but it's something that Cheetah would never give up. And Diana doesn't realize the privilege that she has, the agency that she has, because she has never lived without it. One thing that really struck me is that her arc in her story, her plot line, I should say, because it's not really an arc as we discussed, but her plot line in this movie is identical to the arc that Superman goes through in Superman 2, the Richard Donner movie, Superman 2, which I think was from like 1981. The story beats are exactly the same. In that movie, just like Diana in this movie, Superman chooses to give up his powers in order to have to marry Lois Lane. So he gives up being Superman and just turns into a regular person because he wants to have true love and companionship. And once he loses his powers, this megalomaniac takes over the world, and he has to then give up his love to regain his powers and save the world. It's the same thing that Diana does here, where she gives up her powers to bring Steve back. As a result, she's not able to stop Maxwell Lord, and the world, he takes over the world, and then she has to sacrifice Steve in order to get her powers back to save the world. Same arc. Major key difference, though, is that in Superman 2, there's a whole big sequence where we see Superman, now just Clark Kent without his powers, and he discovers just what it means to be a regular person. He's bullied, he's injured, and he's afraid. He also, as a key part of this, Lois isn't necessarily as into him anymore because she was into Superman. And that's not a knock on Lois, because what Superman realizes is he can't give up his powers. He can't give up being Superman, because being Superman is a fundamental part of his identity and who he is. And so he has these realizations, and so when he gets his powers back, he now has an empathy and an understanding of humanity. He knows why he has to do this, because nobody else can do it. But he's walked a mile in the shoes of the regular people, and he knows how hard it is and how scary it is to be a powerless regular person in a world where other people have power and you don't. We don't get any of that with Diana, because at the moment where she loses her powers almost completely, that's the moment where she then sacrifices Steve and immediately gets them back. We never see her experience what it's like to be a powerless woman in a world where everybody else has power over you, or half of the population have a systematic, like a power, cultural power over you, and in a lot of cases physical power. She never experiences that, and so she has no way to understand what it is she's asking of Minerva, because she fundamentally cannot understand where Cheetah's coming from and why she's doing things. And I thought that would have been a tremendous story, to have Diana lose her powers at the same time that Minerva's gaining her powers, and have Diana learn what it's like to be a powerless woman in a male-dominated 1980s macho society, at the same time where Minerva suddenly discovers what it's like to have power over everybody because she's just become a demigod. That would have been fantastic. We don't get it. We get hints of it, but we don't get it, and we don't get enough of Cheetah's arc. At the end, we don't really get an arc with her, because at the end, we're not even sure whether she's lost her powers. She has a fight at the end where she turns into Cheetah, like fully Cheetah, and then at the end we see that she's reverted to some form of Dr. Minerva. It's unclear, though, whether she ever actually renounced her initial wish, because she was basically granted a second bonus wish to turn into the animalistic Cheetah. So she very well could still have Wonder Woman's powers. So we get no closure on Cheetah, or how she feels at the end, how she's changed as a person. So she only gets part of an arc. That's a movie that would have been really interesting to see, and I think we might have seen it in different circumstances, but I'm 100% convinced that the stuff with the Duke of Deception and the whole idea of the Last of Truth is in direct opposition to the Duke of Deception. That's why he's such a great foil for Diana. That through the lens, or as a way to look at the Trump presidency, that was the basic idea. So if this movie had been made, for instance, in a world where Hillary Clinton had become president, where we're assuming we still see some of the other stuff that's been going on, when I don't know if we would have or not, but stuff like the Me Too movement and things like that, we might have seen a story that was focused on Diana and Cheetah and the power dynamics with women and things like that. But we're kind of don't get any of that, because those characters get the short stick, because there's just not enough room in the movie for 3 different character arcs, because everything is really focused on the plot going forward with Max and Maxwell Lord. And again, I thought it was really interesting and ambitious and bold. I just think the result of that was they had a lot of ideas, and most of them didn't get fleshed out. Several fell by the wayside. So it's just sort of, I don't think it was bad, but it's a very messy movie that has a lot of good points and a lot of points where I just wish they had done things differently or done things better or given us more or less of certain things. The one other thing that I think I want to mention is I've seen some commentary on this already, and I think it was a misstep. When Steve comes back, he does so in what's basically a quantum leap way. His spirit is inhabiting a random dude's body. And basically, they have sex. They have a relationship while he's in this other guy's body. That's problematic. And then at the end, in the little coda, she runs into this guy 6 months later, and thank goodness they didn't have her ask the dude out, because it really looked for a second like she was going to do that. But it was very creepy to me at the end, where she's complimenting him on this outfit he's wearing, which was like a payoff for a joke earlier in the film. And, they're having this little flirtatious moment. And my wife and I were both like, so Diana's looking at this guy basically thinking to herself, I've already had sex with you. You just don't know it. And I think this is a big misstep for this time period. It's something that, particularly in a Wonder Woman movie, I think is a major issue. I think that you're going to be seeing a lot of think pieces about this specific aspect. Again, I've already seen some people bringing it up. We reacted to it as soon as it was happening. While even in the initial scenes with Steve, where they go to bed together, I was like, we had just had a whole sequence where we show that it's a random person's body, and we're in the other guy's apartment. He's taken over this guy's life. That guy, we don't know where his brain is, but all of a sudden he's just usurped this dude's life, and he's in the guy's body, in his apartment, living his life, whatever. But it's Steve, and she goes back to the apartment with him, and they sleep together in this dude's apartment. And she's sleeping with this guy's body. And while that was happening, I was like, oh boy. I don't know, they should have thought this one through. They should have come up with some other way to bring Steve back. If the wish can bring him back, why not just have him reappear as himself? If the wish can bring his soul back to life, why not just create a new body for him? Right? I don't know. I think that was a really bad decision. So that's a problem. And I think we're gonna see more about that in the next few days. So overall, again, I give it a B-, maybe a 6 out of 10. There's a lot of good things in it. The acting is really good. Kristen Wiig is great. There's a lot of really interesting ideas set up, and as a allegory, a superhero movie allegory about Trump, I think it works excellent. I think it's really good. And I think that, I've said this before, but stories have to be about something. If they're not about something, they're not really a story. It's just a sequence of events. And you see this a lot, when I watch things that are not good and just don't resonate, and I'm like, they feel pointless, like a lot of superhero movies feel kind of pointless. A lot of times it's because they're not about anything. They're not trying to say anything. They're people that are like, that's a cool character, and we can do these set piece CGI fight scenes, and it'll be cool to have ninjas fighting robots, fighting Batman, right? And those always feel like soulless experiences, and they're pointless because they don't they're not trying to say anything. Stories have to have a point, or else they're not stories. So I really appreciate that they're trying to do, like, they have a message, and they're really doing something with this. And I think it works on that level. I just think they dropped the ball on a lot of the other levels. The main one being, it's just not about Wonder Woman. It's just not about Wonder Woman. She's not the main character. And that's something they really, really need to work on for the next one. No more Steve Trevor. Who's Diana as a character? Do you know? Is there anything there? Final thought. I did want to add one more thought. I know I'm about done. I was about to sign off, but then I remembered one more thing. There's a post-credit scene where Linda Carter shows up, and we find out she's playing this in the movie. There's this mythical Amazonian figure from 3,000 years ago, who had this suit of armor, and she was kind of like their champion. And they all thought she had died, and it turns out she's still alive. She's still alive, and she's out in the world, and she's apparently been living out in the regular world for 3,000 years. And she's played by Linda Carter, and that's great. Now, the character seems to be a new character to the movies. There's no character that has a direct parallel in the comics, which is great, because it means that speculation won't go crazy on the price of, old back issues, right? But I'm going to change that right now. The closest parallel to me, and this is not a direct parallel, but for me, the closest parallel is this character here, the original Wonder Woman. This is Wonder Woman 298, where she first appears. And the story of the original Wonder Woman is a little bit different. So in the movie, the character was a champion at Themyscira who stayed behind in Man's World as a rear guard to fight off the armies of mankind while the rest of the Amazons were going to Themyscira and hiding the island. They needed time. She was buying them time, and so she sort of sacrificed herself to buy them time. This is a little bit different. Same time period, so it's about 3,000 years earlier, and she's basically named Wonder Woman and given a suit of armor. It's not the same one as in the movie, but she has this suit of Wonder Woman armor. And she's sent out to Man's World just as Wonder Woman is in the current day. And this original Wonder Woman ended up being corrupted and by Man's World. As opposed to teaching them, they taught her, and so she sort of abandoned her belief system and at some point died. And then in this storyline, her Cersei basically reanimates her, and so her skeleton comes back for revenge. So I think it's a different story. I don't think that's where they're going with this, but this is the closest in the comics that I'm aware of, where it's basically the original Amazonian champion who went out into Man's World when Themyscira hid and then died. One of the reasons I think they changed the name, if they were using this as a source at all, is because the character is called Artemis, and of course, post-Crisis, they introduced a different character named Artemis. And it gets really confusing, like everything in Wonder Woman continuity is that the second Artemis is actually based on a different character from the Wonder Woman series. I'm blanking on what her name was. Oriana, I think. From Wonder Woman 250, 251, there's a story where there's a new Wonder Woman who becomes Wonder Woman, and then goes to Man's World and really sucks at being Wonder Woman and ends up dying because she's just, that's the storyline of the second one. But it's almost like they combined these two ideas, because they call her Artemis, and she has the same arc where she becomes the new Wonder Woman, but she's not very good at it, and she ends up dying, and Diana has to take over again. And she's sort of like more violent or whatever. So I think they had to change the name in the movie because they couldn't call her Artemis, because anybody from the comics would assume it was the second Artemis, not the first Artemis. So I don't know. I don't know where they're going with this. I don't know if they're going to bring anything else in. But when I saw those sequences, I immediately thought of the original Wonder Woman, the original Artemis from Wonder Woman's 298. She reappears in 302. That's where she fights Diana. So if you feel like pointlessly speculating on comics that will probably never be of any value, check out Wonder Woman 298 and 302, where you get to meet the Artemis, the original Wonder Woman from 3,000 years ago, with her cool Wonder Woman armor. So I'm curious where they're going with the Linda Carter thing, because it was a little bit out of nowhere. I don't know what they're trying to set up with that, but we'll see. So anyway, those are my exhaustive thoughts on Wonder Woman 84. I certainly recommend everybody seeing it and deciding for yourself. It's worth your time. It is long. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes, 2 hours and 25 minutes. So it's very long, but it's worth it. It's got a lot going for it, and you might get something else out of it than I did. So anyway, thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.